Hello, Voices of Wrestling listener. Dave Ryan here. Have you ever wondered to yourself how many hidden gems are hidden away inside the last years of World Championship Wrestling? Have you ever asked yourself how many tenuous gags can be made about the name Mike Enos? And have you ever thought about what it sounds like for two Irishmen to interpret a very chaotic company through its B show? The answers to all this and more are just a click away. Check out Days of Thunder every second Thursday on the Voices of Wrestling podcast network.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate, Rewind and Rewatch, where we revisit the past 25 years of the Dragon system. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling podcast feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate podcast feed on all podcast platforms and applications. You can follow us on social media at Open Voice Gate. If you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site, and that'll set up. You could click the red box and you set up a one-time or recurring donation. The red boxes sponsor this podcast. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, joined alongside, as always, Case Lowe. Case, did you notice how I managed to pull up at the right time before completely botching that intro?
No, you stuck the landing. You know, it was like being on a plane with Solenberger or whatever his name was. You know, I was
America's greatest hero.
Of
right?
course, yeah. Shout out Norm Macdonald for doing him such justice during his one appearance on the Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien. But yes, no, you stuck the landing. I feel much safer now.
Yeah. But Case, we're here like for the second time this week. We said during the Dragongate 25 that over 2024 we would be celebrating the 25-year history of the Dragon system with special Rewind and Rewatch episodes. But Case, the 25th anniversary year is not technically over yet. We have until the end of this month, so we have one more Rewind and Rewatch that we have for everyone this week.
And specifically, and we tried to get this as close to the date of this show as we possibly could. I think it's going to come out just a few days before that. But we're talking about the 20th anniversary of one of the most consequential shows in the history of Dragongate. It's a weird show. We'll talk about it when we get there. I don't know if you can call it one of the best shows. It's certainly one of the most memorable. And in the same way where we talked about last week, 12-1-16, the class of 2016 rookies against Team Veteran at that time, we talked about how that was one of the most important matches in the history of Dragongate. Well, we're going to talk about another match that I think would certainly fit into the top 10 most important matches in the history of Dragongate. Really, I will say up top, if this show doesn't happen and it doesn't go as well as it does, Mike, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic in saying that maybe Dragongate doesn't reach its 25th anniversary.
Yeah, this was... And as we get into the timeline, we will talk about how this big show completely changes things and in a necessary way. And the show we are talking about is the Korakuen Hall show from January 14th, 2005. And especially the lead up to the show and the consequences of the show and the real particulars just up and down the card of what's happening. Like of course we are talking about a show that has some major angles on it, but you also see stuff pretty much up and down this entire card that I feel like if it did not land the way it did, just because of what the company was facing at the end of, really the back half of 2004 from the Ultima split, as we will get into, through the end of the calendar year, this kind of felt like Dragongate's first, how should we say this, the first big problem, I think we say, when they were as Dragongate and how they navigated out of said big problem to have this show that we will be talking about really does dictate the next 20 years of the promotion.
And I've said this before, but I think canonically, this show that we're going to review today is the first important show in the history of Dragongate proper. You know, obviously Toryumon, you have a rich 5-year history there, but if you're talking about Dragongate 2 Wars Dragongate, you can start with this show. And I don't think you miss anything that important. That's one of the reasons this show is so important, because if they don't do what they did on this show and it doesn't land the way that it does, and they don't have the year that they do, at that point, the trajectory of Dragongate is probably no different than a Michinoku Pro. You know, they had an amazing run, and then things changed, personnel changed, and they were no longer able ever to find that amazing run. And, you know, Dragongate's been threatened, you know, in 2004 and then again in 2018 with these borderline catastrophic situations. And I think both times, and granted the economy today is different than it was 20 years ago, but I think both times the way that they've been able to steer the ship out of what looked like certain danger is a rather impressive feat. You know, it's why we wanted to celebrate the 25th anniversary. Yes, it's a nice round number. It's easy to do that. But also, I just think the history of this promotion is utterly remarkable.
Yeah, because especially, and I hope over the now we have to be approaching like our 75th Rewind and Rewatch episode at this point, Case. Like
there were 50 Dragongate USA episodes.
The Davey edit.
The Davey Richards Chronicles, which is unfortunately not as fun in 2025 as it was in 2021, although I still stand by its great audio content. I would highly recommend people check out. And then we did 5 Masato Yoshino shows when he retired, and I think this will be the 12th Rewind and Rewatch of the 25th anniversary celebration. So yeah, we're approaching 70 episodes.
So we've got big round numbers that we're dealing with as well. But I feel like throughout this this series, we have talked around this, and I think that, like, ironically, last year we basically did a show that picks up right after the show happens.
That's true. Yes,
in its own way, and that is going to be like, if you're looking for like a fun double header of Open the Voice Gate, I hope that we can make this Rewind and Rewatch fit in with the Open the Brave Gate championship episode that we did. I think that was last February.
It was March. Because that show was in early March. I got to say, before we get into the timeline, I had this thought as I was watching this January 14th, 2005 show. And this is going to make you mad. And this is only a half idea. Don't take this in any sort of serious way. But you and I, behind the scenes, have been doing a lot of work on our next Rewind and Rewatch project. A lot of footage has been bought. A lot of notes have been taken. A lot of ideas have been discussed. And then I watched this January 14th, 2005 Dragongate show, and I was like, "What? We should just watch 2005 Dragongate."
You're not
what
wrong.
What are we doing?
You're not. I mean, similarly, when I was doing this, I was like, man, personally for myself, outside of Omega versus Kid, there was stuff on up and down the show, at least like the semi-main and the main event, that I was like, I enjoyed this much more than I did the entire New Year's week of 25 wrestling shows.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, the main event on this show is... I have so much to say about one guy in particular and just how much I miss him being at that level. I will say also, so this show that we're going to talk about is January 14th, 2005 Dragongate. The show is Primal Gate, which is a name that they don't use anymore for their tours. I've tried to make an effort in the Rewind and Rewatches to make sure that if we're talking about footage that isn't on the network, to make it available. A few years ago, finding Dragongate stuff from this era was a super big challenge.
Right.
I don't think that's the case now. When I look on the internet, and I do frequently just to see what is out there, it seems like you can find 2005 pretty easily. And I know this show is out there streaming on the internet. If anybody can't find it, send me a DM, Voices of Wrestling Discord, or on Twitter, @_ in your case. I can send you a link to this show. But this show is out there. All of 2005 is out there. I guess we can talk about this now, where it's really, really easy to consume 2005 Dragongate, because what they would do is they had, at the time, they had a show
the SkyPerfect deal.
Exactly. So they had a monthly SkyPerfect pay-per-view, and then they had a Gaiora TV deal still. I think we talked about this on the Bravegate episode, but just to summarize real quick, basically, on a month where you didn't have another major show, either the Open the Bravegate tournament in March or Kobe World and that might have been it, because this is long before they had the Big Five, what is now the Big Six. You would get a Dragongate show in full as a SkyPerfect pay-per-view, and for most of those months, that was just the Korakuen Hall show. And then you would get a Gaora broadcast basically following the company around that tour, showing, full matches and clips in Yokohama and Osaka and Kyoto and wherever else they would go. And then on the months where they had, again, the Bravegate tournament or Kobe World in July, that would be the SkyPerfect pay-per-view. And then you would get most of the Korakuen footage on that Gaora broadcast instead. So you were looking at one full show and 1 2-hour TV package that was super tight, nicely edited. You would get clips and full matches, and it's just really easy to follow.
Yeah, and I think at least with the SkyPerfect programming, and this is something that I took notes of that does not really play into the actual show itself, but it's worth talking about. One of the good things about SkyPerfect is that they would go and they would spend about 10-15 minutes before the main show would start, the live show would start, and they would go through what happened over the last few months. And more often than not, it was stuff that had made air on the Infinities or ended up on, because the SkyPerfect first started off as the battle stations, and then they dropped that naming pretty quick. But you get like a really good about 8 minutes of footage, basically catching you up to speed very well. And this time it was done in the most 2005 way possible to Linkin Park's Numb, which was fantastic.
Great stuff. Absolutely fascinated, not to get off topic, but as somebody that works in the alternative rock industry adjacent, absolutely fascinated by the public perception to the new Linkin Park singer, because and I didn't fully understand this until, and I grew up liking Linkin Park. I adore the Linkin Park Jay-Z EP. I really like the Linkin Park hits. It did not dawn on me until I started working where I currently work that Linkin Park is the biggest alternative band that there's ever been. They are the most beloved alternative band that there is, bar none. There is Nirvana is huge, Pearl Jam is huge, the Red Hot Chili Peppers are huge. They are not as big as Linkin Park, and
I think some of that is the fact that Linkin Park, at least for like the prime demographic, now is something from like their teenage years.
100%, 100%, yes.
Whereas like 10 years before. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, but it's why like Sum 41 right now, who is a band that I've never enjoyed. Sum 41 announced they were going to retire, and then they did about a 15-month retirement tour, and they kept on extending the tour, and it wasn't as much, hey, we don't want to go, we like all this attention, that's obviously part of it, but they were like, we've never sold tickets the way we're selling tickets right now. People have never cared about our band the way that they're caring about us right now, and it's because, one, I never thought I would say this, Sum 41 actually wrote new music that was shockingly good, but two,
oh wow,
they have a song called Landmines that was a giant radio hit in this past year. That is the best Sum 41 song I've ever heard. It is unbelievable how good it is. But also, the clientele for Sum 41 now are homeowners and people with ideally disposable income. And instead of discovering something new, they're like, yeah, I love Sum 41. I want to go see My Chemical Romance on their reunion tour, but they don't want to see Linkin Park. And it's such an interesting deal where when they announced that Emily Armstrong was joining the band, the initial public reaction to it actually wasn't super negative. It seemed like a lot of people were pretty warm to the idea. And the first single they put out, if you like Linkin Park, I mean, it's a Linkin Park song. It's very, very good. And as time has gone on, and obviously the Scientology stuff did not help, and obviously the Danny Masterson stuff did not help, but also, without being cruel, it was a Twitter issue more than a real life issue. But as time has gone on, and people have heard the album, and they've seen her tour with the band, more and more people have gone, you know what? I just don't like that this exists. I just wish they would have called themselves something else. And I would have thought when they debuted with her that it would have been, I hate this, she's not Chester, I'm never going to listen to this. And then slowly everybody would warm up to it. But it's been the opposite. The initial response was like, okay, we'll see where this goes. And as time has gone on, people have gone, you know what? This, for whatever reason, makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, because I remember one of my random interests is esports case that like Linkin Park did the League of Legends Worlds song last year.
Yes.
And that was right as she was announced. And I think that might have been that first single that
It's
you're
the
referring
second
to.
one, because Heavy as the Crown, I think, is that song.
Right, yeah.
Which is good, but it's not as good as the first single.
Well, I mean, you get involved with Riot and they fuck everything up. But and it's interesting because at least for me, as someone who is very that like Linkin Park was kind of that band for me in a while, like as like I'm like the prime target for that. It seemed like that originally it was like, oh, it's not Chester, and then Chester's kids were talking, and then everyone's like, okay, we're going to kind of give it a shot, and then the Scientology things came out, and then everything kind of just snowballed from there, and it became a real problem, not a social media problem, as you put it.
I have to be careful of what I say here because I have a few funny Linkin Park reunion stories, but Chester's son is a weird thing. To me, he's just saying a lot of stuff that has no substance, and he's allowed to be upset. I'm not going to tell him how he should feel, but I've never read anything that he's said where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. The other thing that I'll note is, like, I don't know if you know this, Mike, but My Chemical Romance is doing a summer tour in stadiums, in football stadiums, and it's all sold out. It's all gone. And
oh, yeah. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And, when Linkin Park was discussing this reunion, their idea was, we will also be doing stadiums this summer. We will completely sell out all of these stadiums instantly. People are going to want to see Linkin Park. And then before they announced the tour, they said, what if we do these in arenas instead? And now you look at some of the seating charts for those arenas, and they are not doing great.
Now, are there any entertainment and sports arenas that they can move things to?
I believe they'll be doing Osaka Bodymaker Coliseum when they're back in Japan. No, I don't know about any entertainment and sports arenas they can move to, but it's a fascinating deal where I really thought initially the public would be too harsh on it and then warm up to it, and the opposite has happened.
Yeah, and it just like getting kind of back to it weirdly. It's something that like shows like the day and age of like Dragongate, at least in 2005. Yeah, that's a little after Numb and all of that, but they were still always, even like through the Toryumon era, and as they went into Dragongate, you see the changes where they would go and they had like the Offspring song that they had for the intro for a long time, and then they had Numb, which was still like 2 years. I guess it really wasn't that old at that time. It was 2 years old at that point, but you kind of got to see like, oh, this is the new edge to Dragongate in a way.
Very much so. So let's hop into this timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the Wrestling Observer newsletter from July 12th, 2004. And what we'll do here is take you through the very last day of Toryumon into the start of Dragongate. If you've ever wondered how this promotion existed in its first few months, this is going to be that timeline. On July 12th, 2004, the Observer, Dave, wrote, right after one of its biggest shows in history, it was announced that the Toryumon promotion in Japan was closing up. It's actually a restructuring, as a new company using most of the same wrestlers is opening called Dragongate, which is the English translation from Toryumon. Ultimo Dragon will have nothing to do with the new group, which will be run by Magnum Tokyo as the top star. Takashi Okamura, who was the president of Dragongate, was the president of Toryumon, will also continue as the president of Dragongate. On July 6th, the group held a press conference to announce an affiliation with the Fuji Network. They will be running 2 shows a day from July 17th to August 31st in Odiaba, a Fuji Network makeshift arena where they broadcast summer festival events. They will be getting a lot of clips during the afternoon on the network, but it's not a network television show. The promotion is largely chasing women and children and not the traditional male wrestling audience. Dragon will continue to use the Toryumon name and train wrestlers and promote shows using Japanese wrestlers in Mexico. Dragon divested himself of the group as he's going back to WWE in November, but this time without his mask, wrestling as Asai. Toryumon was praised as taking pro wrestling to a new audience, concentrating on attracting young housewives by using smaller young wrestlers who put on high-flying shows with flashy moves that appeal to people who weren't serious fans. The idea was providing a fun night of entertainment using wrestling as a backdrop, with Dragon trying to use his own ideas, as well as combining aspects of US, Japanese, and Mexican styles. It was the most successful of all the smaller promotions in Japan, running a full schedule of events based out of Kobe, including frequently at its small home arena that held a few hundred fans. The promotion ran a very successful biggest show of the year, on July 4th in Kobe, drawing a sellout of 8,000 fans at the World Arena, which for pro wrestling today outside of Tokyo is almost unheard of. The show was built around a tournament for the Ultimate Dragon Gym Championship, with Shima, the company's all-time biggest star, beating Shuji Kondo in 2204 with the Mad Splash. The only outside talent brought in on the show were Jinsei Shinzaki, the Kinsuke family, and then Dave notes that Sasaki and Hokuto were DQ'd against Daniel Mishima and Michael Iwasa, while Hokuto also beat out comedy jobber Stalker Ichikawa in 35 seconds. Katsuhiko Nakajima lost to Ultimo Dragon, and Jinsei Shinzaki teamed with Magnum Tokyo to beat Don, Fuji, and Taru. However, the day after the tournament to crown a new champion, Shima returned the title belt as all belts were vacant as the new group starts up. Mike, I just threw a lot at you there. What are your thoughts of this note in the Observer?
So let's take it, I think, probably paragraph by paragraph, at least how we have this noted, because there's really kind of a bunch of things, but it's easier to kind of partition it that way. So if you're someone who is a modern fan or someone who came in over the last decade, you might go, hey, that sounds pretty familiar, because similarly, this was how it was described when the OWE split happened in 2018. Incidentally, Okamura was supposed to be a figurehead over one of the sides as well. Really, I think the big thing that we see in 2004 is the idea of Magnum Tokyo as a figurehead, at least in Dave's reporting. And I think it's one of those understandable Genki Horiguchi as a booker kind of thing, because it was pretty well known, at least dating back to 2003. Magnum had his own business partners and sponsors and all of that, and he was at least the story goes was already kind of floating things out there at that point. So I think it makes sense why Dave kind of focuses more on Magnum Tokyo when if you're someone who is much more in tune with the ins and outs of the various Toryumon promotions. By 2004, Magnum is not that top star, it's more of a nod to what he was hearing behind the scenes, I guess. I feel like that's the first kind of thing to talk about out of this.
I think that's a fair assessment. I did want to ask you this, because there's a note in here later on where Dave is talking about Dragongate. And, I mentioned this when we did the M2K show last February, where in 2001 and 2002, Dave is watching pretty much all the Toryumon TV. He's very locked in on this promotion. He's comparing Shima to Shawn Michaels. He seems to really enjoy it. By 2004, for whatever reason, Dave is off Toryumon and off Dragongate. There's very, very little information in the Observer at this time period about either promotion. But there's a note later on where Dave refers to it specifically as Magnum Tokyo's Dragongate. And I only raise an eyebrow at that because the further we get away from the OWE split, there are things that we can now identify in older Dragongate footage as being uniquely Shima. Some of the styles of matches, some of the behavior in those matches is uniquely Shima, because we see it now in Glate and it's gone away from contemporary Dragongate. I do have to wonder what level of credit, and I basing this off the idea of giving him a ton of credit, what level of credit we have to give Magnum Tokyo for the creative in 2005 with all of these multi-man matches, all of these 2 out of 3 falls matches, stuff that feels way different from even 2011 or 2013 through 2016, stuff that seemed present in the promotion from 2004 when Magnum took over until 2006 when he left. And then by 2007, it feels like they've completely divested from any of their Mexican heritage. And I do have to wonder if Magnum is the one responsible for a lot of the great booking that we saw in 2005.
Yeah, and I think that that's an entirely valid thing to bring up, especially with modern understanding of how Dragongate kind of operates and books. With our understanding of how it operates now, I think it would be surprising if Magnum did not have a heavy hand in there. How I always say who's in the room? Magnum might have been actually leading the room at that time, and that's
the impression that I get, simply because 2005 feels way different than most other years, in 2006 to some degree, but then he's gone by midway through 2006.
Right. And then within some of these parts within 2005, 2006, when he was so hurt, you see the promotion change away from some of his tendencies as well.
And lean really heavy into things that we would later identify as uniquely Shima.
Right. Yeah. No, but I think it's entirely like that's like the complicated thing about talking about Magnum Tokyo and the transition from Toryumon Japan into Dragongate, because he is the key person in that. It just is also something where, like, at this point, at least from what I know, Case, I don't know if he didn't have equity at that point. You know, if it was some of his money with Okamura, and then when he left, it was like, okay, maybe he did have some percentage of it at one point. So again, this getting to Dave, it makes a lot of sense that he would identify it as Magnum, considering how important he was at that time. But that's just my own pure speculation.
Yeah, again, I'm not going to say with any confidence, but I would almost assume that he did. Maybe
Right, yeah.
maybe Japanese companies are structured differently, and I don't know, but I mean, Shima's the biggest star of this promotion, but
From day one.
But Magnum is the face of Dragon Gate at this time. You know,
Mhm.
Magnum is doing the PR stuff. You know, he's the one leading that press conference. I would assume that he had maybe a sizable financial stake in the promotion, but again, that's maybe something to ask Jay next time he's on.
Right. And I think from like that and talking about things that were uniquely Magnum in its way, the Odiaba relationship and the relationship with Fuji Television is mentioned here. That for 2004 and 2005, Dragon Gate participated in the Odiaba Adventure King Festival, which basically Fuji Television has a big portion of this man-made island in the Bay of Tokyo Bay, called Odaiba, and they would have festivals. They still have festivals to this day, but they've changed over time. And Dragon Gate, as a part of one of the adventure parks, set up the ring there and did it. And, you know, by 2006, they're not doing that. And that makes me think, oh, that definitely was a Magnum thing and a Magnum relationship.
Yeah, very much so. Let's also talk about here just the split. Are you ready to get into that?
Yeah. We've kind of talked around it. The way that the split kind of has gone, and the way that has always kind of come out about it, is the big disparity between Japan and Mexico. And I think that's kind of the first point that we should kind of hammer on here, that and it's something that I think has become more clear over the last 7 years, Case, that like Dragon Gate and Toryumon Japan, like the Japan operation and the Mexico operations, in a lot of different ways, were working completely apart. But there was one fundamental thing that, if you're going to ask me, one fundamental thing that killed the Mexico and Japan portion, or the Okamura and Dragon portion, is where the flow of money went, because everything from Japan went into funding Mexico.
Yes. So the best way that I've ever heard this described, and I'll use it here pretty much verbatim, is when Jay was doing his Timeline podcast and he talked about this era of the promotion. He talks about how the relationship at this point between Ultimo and the rest of the promotion was that Ultimo was acting like a pimp, and that the Dragon Gate roster was his clientele, that he would keep them looking good, but keep them poor so that they needed him. And by the end of 2003 into 2004, Toryumon is an objective success. The attendances they're drawing, again, Dave makes note of it. Did they have 8,000 people in World Arena for 2004 Kobe World? No, they did not. Did they probably have 5,000 or 6,000 and outdrew whatever New Japan or Noah did in that building? Yes, absolutely. This is a promotion that was not only successful, they were the busiest promotion in Japan at the time, still are. And the way it has been described is that the roster, whether it was Shima or Magnum or anybody else, were basically living in
At the dojo.
Yeah, they were living in the dojo. I was going to say college dorms, but they're living in the dojo. They were seeing no financial gain from being a promotion that was succeeding pretty wildly and pretty rapidly at a time where other promotions in Japan were not doing that. They were not seeing any of the financial gain from it, because all the money that Toryumon made was going back to Mexico to fund the Ultimo Dragon Gym, which never made money.
Yeah, because one of like the big things about the dojo experience, at least as it was up until 2004, would be, okay, you would go, it would be kind of similar to how it is now. You pay for your test fee. If you go in there, then you are you're doing your training there, you pay your room and board, you pay your tuition like this, and then all of that was going to Mexico. It was not really going to really the company itself. It was going because when you were in Mexico, just because of economics, and also it's worth like noting, like just part of the time that Toryumon Mexico Ultimo Dragon Gym operated was during a pretty significant recession in Mexico. So it was a situation that you would do all this time in Japan, and then you were kind of sent to Mexico to fend for yourself, and where you would go there and be like, oh, where is the money? And you look at the apartment complex you all stayed at, maybe the rooms at Arena Nakapon. I know that if people are wondering where like the relationship between Dragongate wrestlers and Nosawa Rongai happened, he like was pretty famous being in Mexico in the early 2000s, taking Toryumon guys out to eat and stuff like that. And it kind of conditioned you to like a certain point that when you get back into Japan, Ultimo's keeping you so busy that you don't really think about, oh, hey, I've wrestled conservatively 160 times a year. And
yeah, I mean they were doing, you look at the Toryumon schedule. Everybody should do that. Just go on Cage Match and just look at the dates where they would go
and compare it to Noah and New Japan while you do this.
Exactly. I mean, they would go, a week straight of shows. They would go 10, maybe 9 shows in 10 days. And working a Toryumon style where, hey, even if you're going to work the house show style of that is a lot of bumps. That's a lot of wear and tear. And it's what makes the Genkis and the Fujis and the Mochizukis and the Susumus, like, it's not only that they've been doing it for a long time, they've been doing it more than anybody for a very long time.
Right, yeah, and it's the commitment to doing that. So, I mean, after essentially 5 years of doing this, I think it's natural that kind of resentment built up, and then getting to a point where really all sides just kind of have to walk away from each other. And I wrote about this when Ultimo came back 5 years ago, or now it's almost 6 years ago.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I know. Where it was like just like putting yourself like where you were, or like putting yourself in the shoes of the Toryumon roster members at this point. It made a lot of sense why it took 15 years to heal that big wound with it. And it's one of those situations that, I mean, there's still certain Toryumon originals that you'll not see on a show with Ultimo Dragon to this day because of that. I mean, outright kind of manipulative relationship.
It's very strange, It's again, the sense of loyalty there is very interesting, and you hit it right on the head with Nosawa. I wrote about when I wrote about Genki Horiguchi and the 20th anniversary of 2003 El Numero Uno, which the article primarily focuses on that one night, but I was able to interview Genki, but then we had a friend of the show who Genki did a big sit down interview on YouTube with some magazine. It must have been Weekly Puro a few years ago, and it's a borderline Genki Horiguchi shoot interview. And so a friend of the show translated that interview for us, and Genki talks about, again, getting shipped off to Mexico with nothing, with no money, doesn't speak the language, culture shock. They're all terrified. They're seeing people get mugged in the streets. They're, getting pelted with trash during their first few matches.
Shima got mugged and talks about how there was a day where he was like in the showers and he got all his possessions stolen. All he had was like his towel and his shower flip-flops.
Exactly. And so, at that point in time, Nosawa and Mazada are, I think, full-time with CMLL, and I would think at least making some money, and they took them in. Now, also, tell me if my memory is incorrect here. It seemed like the Shima crew and part of the T2P journey was a lot of Nakampon. But by the time the T2P experiment finishes and by the time they move on to Toryumon X, I feel like they're setting up shop in Mexico City and are running out of Arena Coliseo way more than Nakampon. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right, because there was always that strong relationship between Ultimo and CMLL. Like, he would be through like his wilderness years running Dragon Manias in Arena Mexico.
Yeah. Oh, which I don't think makes a ton of difference, but I was just thinking about that out loud. So that is, I mean, that's the split. That's why it happened. Is Ultimo Dragon was living life as Ultimo Dragon, and as a result, a lot of people suffered, and the split lasted until another split happened. And I feel pretty confident, even removed from, say, the Yamato show closing promo at Kobe World, if the 2018 split doesn't happen, Mike, we never see Ultimo Dragon in a Dragon Gate ring.
No, absolutely not. No.
It's why, it was really hard to explain in 2019 to some people, like, why this was so insane, because it was just, the series of events that led to it was nuts. But as we continue on in the timeline here, I want to highlight this show on August 1st, 2004. This was a SkyPerfect pay-per-view. This was in Differ Ariake, so in Tokyo. And the main event of this show was Aagan Issou versus Final M2K, Shuji Kondo, Takuya Sugawara, Toru Washi, and Yashi against Masaki Mochizuki, Second Doi, Susumu Yokosuka, and Kenichiro Arai. And at the time, and this is true for the July and August Dragon Gate calendar, so this very first tour that they ran, they not only had the everyday pro wrestling events that were happening in Odaiba, but they also had to fulfill the venue commitments that were booked by Ultimo when they were still Toryumon. So there are times, because the everyday pro wrestling shows were, 2 shows a day that were lighthearted comedy shows, and then every once in a while you would get an everyday pro wrestling premium show, which was like a full-on Dragon Gate show. Yeah, once a week. So there were times at the very start of this promotion where they were running 3 shows a day. Now, again, granted, one of those shows, it's going to be, Aagan and Stalker. I'll look at the card right now. Everyday Pro Wrestling, August 1st, 2004. The first show was Aagan and Stalker 3 different times, and then Taru versus Super Shisa. And then the other one on that show the other one on that day was the Florida Brothers versus Taru in a handicap match, and then Magnum Tokyo and Ryo Saito versus Shogo Takagi and Takuya Sugawara. Not exactly a bunch of heavy hitters on those shows, but it's the setting the show up, it's the working the show, it's the muscles that are being used to do that show. And then they also had a pay-per-view in Tokyo that night. So they do a great thing in this main event, and this is out there, this footage is out there, where they tell a story of Aagan missing the train from Odaiba to Differ Ariake. So he has to run from one venue to the other, and they intersplice clips throughout the show of Aagan running by all of these different landmarks so that people could tell where he was at, which is genius in the sense that it let people know, hey, here's where we're doing these other shows. If you want to check us out here, basically, here's how to get there. But it also works out because Aagan shows up like 10 minutes into the main event and runs straight from the front doors of the arena into the ring and does a diving headbutt in the first thing that he does in the match. It is perhaps the biggest highlight of 2004 Dragon Gate, just because it's so much fun.
Yeah, and when you think about just when they were kicking this all off, this is their first Battle Station show, and you lead off with something like this where you are already getting people into the thing. It's like, hey, these are the new things we are doing now, and then have someone who, at least in 2004 and 2005, is seen as kind of like the Everman hero a little bit in Dragon Gate, and Aagan, that it really made perfect sense that, of course, he would be the one that's just like, man, I had to go get another pack of smokes. I missed the train. Looks like I'm running. And just the idea, and again, we can't look at this in 2025 eyes. Even in Japan, where where technology and maps and all of that is one thing, being able to say hey guys, this is from Ariake to Odaiba. This is how you get there. Or hey, you maybe recognize this one landmark here, and even though you're not around Ariake, just in the way back, and it's oh no, that's great. Now I can learn from that ward to get there. My one last Odaiba note that I thought you'd enjoy: Odaiba is technically in Koto ward, the home of the Mochizuki.
I love that. Good things come out of that ward. That's what I've always said.
Absolutely. But it's just a real, you're starting to see some of the canniness kind of pop up with that kind of idea in 2004, where I don't know necessarily how much you would see something like that, at least that kind of apparent for them doing that. Ultimo wouldn't be trying to get everyone to go to Odaiba Everyday Pro Wrestling. He would just assume you'd already know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, they really this is why 2004, this July to December period, is so interesting because Dragon Gate seems to be battling the fact that they did exist, that there were canon storylines that they could not ignore, while also trying to be this entirely new thing. And the reason that I said up top is that, you know, this January 14th, 2005 show feels like the first real important show in the history of Dragon Gate, is because there's just a weird tone to these 2004 shows. A lot of that is dictated on two things. You and I always say Dragon Gate is one, the quality of the promotion is defined by the heel unit and how good they are. And two, you can tell Dragon Gate is really humming given what their output in Korakuen Hall is. And in 2004, in the latter half of 2004 specifically, they have a lame duck heel unit, and their Korakuen Hall shows are not very good.
Yeah, that's right. And it kind of like you see over this, and as we'll get to the points on the timeline, there's a lot of shedding that happens, and I think that's pretty natural. I mean, if we compare it to 2018 in the same way, you see after the split in pretty soon fashion Shingo Takagi leaving, and in the fall of 2004, there were a lot of pieces that were starting to kind of float by the wayside or working their way out of the promotion at a time, and it does not necessarily make a interesting watch in that regard.
On August 14th, 2004, Suwa works his final match for the promotion. This was on Open the Gate from Kyoto KBS Hall, and he is in a 2-on-1 handicap match. Daniel Mishima and Michael Iwasa are DQ'd, or I'm sorry, they win via DQ in Suwa's last match in the promotion. The Suwa thing is weird. We talked about this, and you know, this is the sort of the third show we've talked about 2004 in this year, because we did not only the Brave Gate tournament in 2005 and talked about some of this, but we did El Numero Uno 2004, which is directly before this timeline starts. And Suwa was supposed to be the guy. 2004 was supposed to be Suwa's year. Suwa gets hurt. For whatever reason, he loses interest in Dragon Gate pretty much immediately. He very quickly moves on to Pro Wrestling Noah from here, and his character is that he hated where he wrestled and he was ready for the serious Pro Wrestling Noah competition, and it just never happened. You know, Suwa is one of those great what ifs, because if he just stays healthy and wins El Numero Uno, he probably wins the belt at World 2004, and we're off to the races, and who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear, like, as we spent some time talking about, like, who are the real power brokers here, it's clear that Suwa hated Magnum Tokyo.
That is
like,
one of the most known things we have. I think number one is Shima hates Ultimo, Ultimo hates Shima, and I think number two is for whatever reason, Magnum Tokyo and Suwa did not get along.
And it was not in the Ultimo Shima thing. There was still a veneer of professionalism. There was no professionalism famously between Suwa and Magnum Tokyo. So the fact that he already found his way out within 6 weeks makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that that's like a key thing that you have to kind of mark off. Okay, so 6 weeks in, you lose Suwa. And then what all happens in the remainder of the year, you start losing more and more, faster and faster.
Keep that in mind as we go along here. We go to August 28th, 2004. This is the first Dragon Gate Korakuen Hall show. What's notable on this show is, one, it's not that good of a show. Let me actually read this full card. We'll talk about this opening match here in a second, but it's Catcher Fuji versus Second Doi, Shogo Takagi and Yashi versus Arakan and Mochi in a 4-minute match. The Florida Brothers versus Magnum in another handicap match. Shuji Kondo and Takuya Sugawara versus Anthony W. Mori and Yoshino. That match went 52 seconds in a no contest. And then your semi-main event, Shima and Taru versus Genki Horiguchi and Ryo Saito. In your main event, a 4-way key hunting elimination match. Susumu Yokosuka defeated Dragon Kid, Milano Collection AT, and Toru Owashi. This is just a brutal looking card, because it's a lot of Aagan Issou, but it's Aagan Issou being uninteresting.
And you have they really went to the well a lot with Don Fuji being a kleptomaniac over the years, and I think that's one of the nice things that when they came back and did that with Dragon Dia, it was like, remember how nostalgic, like that kind of feeling with this. at the time arguably was not necessarily a hot thing to kick off the show. And the key hunting matches were dreadful. Like, just because the gimmick, and this gimmick goes away, I feel like I don't think we've had a key hunting match in 15 years at this point.
I think the last one was 2013 because it's
12 years.
It's when T-Hawk won and then challenged Yoshino and Korakuen.
Right, yeah, because like the idea is that it's always 4 people, and the idea is you either get pens or you're able to rip off the turnbuckle pads, but you're only allowed to rip off 3, and if you don't find the key by your third one, you're eliminated from the match. So it's just, in a lot of ways, it feels like Tony Khan would love that stipulation.
Because I think the idea was to get the key that was placed on the Dreamgate belt over.
Right.
But it caused the match to suffer, so it's no good. But the opening match on this show, it was a bat versus iron perm match. Like you talked about, Don Fujii was once again being a kleptomaniac. He had stolen Second Doi's bat. Second Doi, for those that don't know, is Naruki Doi playing a baseball character. And so the rules here were bat versus iron perm. If Doi won, he got his baseball bat back. If Don Fujii won, Doi would be forced to get an iron perm haircut. We would see this a decade later with Kotoka and Chihiro Tamanaga in a punch perm match where Tamanaga lost, got a punch perm, was renamed Punch Tamanaga, and the rest is history.
Yeah, Don Fujii has an obsession with getting people to have like very old style like mob haircuts.
Yes,
that's what these are. He was making like a joke about like, oh, if you want to be a tough guy, you got to be like the tough guys you see on the street, and that means you need to have an iron or punch perm.
And remember this as we go along, that this is what Naruki Doi was doing in the back half of 2004. We get a note on the September 13th, 2004 Wrestling Observer newsletter. Dave says the Dragongate promotion, formerly Toryumon, now run by Magnum Tokyo, did shows for 51 days this summer in Odiaba as a part of a Summer Fuji TV festival, think MTV Spring Breakout, before 400,000 fans live. The math doesn't add up there, but by all accounts, because they went back the next year, that the Fuji TV Odaiba stuff was looked at as a success from both parties in 2004.
Yeah, were there 400,000 people at the overall Odaiba festival on that island across those 51 days? Yeah, probably. But did 400,000 people watch 3 Stalker Ichikawa matches in a session? Absolutely not.
We go to September 17th. This is the Gate of Sanctuary from Yoyagi National Gymnasium number 2. This is the first big-time Dragongate pay-per-view that they get. It was headlined by Shima defending the Dreamgate belt against Susumu Yokosuka. Also on this show, hair versus hair match with Shuji Kondo and Takuya Sugawara defeating Anthony W. Mori and Ryo Saito. There is a Masaki Mochizuki versus Katsuhika Nakajima match as Nakajima continued his trend in 2004 of being 16 years old and wrestling the greatest wrestlers of all time. And also your opening match here, and this is just worth noting that it was Final M2K. It was Kness, Kenichiro Arai, and Second Doi. They defeated Aagan Issou, Shogo Takagi, Toru Owashi, and Yashi in your opening match. Any thoughts on this show, Mike?
So, not really on the show itself. I would state, though, if you're thinking about September Big Show, this is the predecessor to Dangerous Gate.
Yep, exactly. And the Shima Susumu matches is fine. They would have better matches later, but this is... it's them trying to figure out what the tone of this promotion will be, and that would continue as they moved into October. And on October 3rd, 2004, they began the Rey de Parejas Tour. Of course, we now know Rey de Parejas as a tag team tournament. It was that in 2003. In 2004, it was a trios tournament to decide the first Open the Triangle Gate champions. And with Suagon, Don Fujii decided to team up with Naruki Doi and Naoki Tanizaki as the Iron Perms trio. Mike, I regret to inform you the Iron Perms trio did not win the first ever Open the Triangle Gate championships.
No, that's correct, because the first Open the Triangle Gate champions were the last remnants of Italian Connection, Yoshino, Milano Collection at AT, and Anthony W. Mori. Don Fujii tried to steal Naoki Tanizaki's surfboard. That's why that's happening.
Yeah, not a super enjoyable period of anybody's career here. The thing that this tour...
Objection. There's one great time in someone's career. It was a great time in Kensuke Sasaki's career.
Well, that's where we disagree, because I'm not into this Kensuke stuff at all. This is, well, I guess enough time has passed, and I don't really think we've talked about this on any of these shows. But at the time, where full blown Kensuke Sasaki is basically married to the Florida brothers. Quickly, can you explain what all of that was?
All right, so the Florida brothers first are actually good. I feel like this is like our generational difference happening right here. And everyone's seen the senior Lariato clips on social media.
Exactly.
And the thing is that they, for a long time, kept on trying to say that they met a long lost cousin in Florida named Kensuke, and they and all the while it looked like it took slowly them getting Kensuke to join the side. Akira Hokuto was utterly baffled by why her husband would be entertaining herself with these absolute fools, and then by the end of the storyline, they all became members of the Florida brothers, and it's tremendous stuff. It's actually great. Don't listen to Case. It's actually one of the few funny comedy acts other than Stalker Ichikawa.
Not into it. Not my thing. Not my thing now. Not my thing then. It was the clear detractor of this show that we're going to review here in just a second. The other thing that happened during this Ray Day Parade House tour that's worth noting is, Mike, we get the first graduate of the Dragongate dojo in Shingo Takagi. He links up with Shima and Taru to form the Crazy Max representative team on this tour.
Yeah, so this is Toryumon fourth class, the people that didn't go to Mexico, basically. And famously, this would include BB Hulk, Akira Tozawa, Tadasuke, Yuki Ono / Katsuo. And if things worked out the way, the weird sliding door thing, this was probably going to be the Kota Ibushi class. If things happened differently, Kota Ibushi was a functional person.
Do tell. What do we know about this?
Oh, famously, he was rejected from Toryumon twice because he didn't know how to send an application. Right. But a standard thing, and it's very standardized. He didn't send he didn't include a photo one time, and one time he submitted it much past the date. And I mean, Ultimo just didn't have time with that if you weren't going to give him the checks,
No, Ultimo had to make money. He didn't have time for that.
Right. Yeah. So famously, before he ended up where he ended up, he was really into Toryumon, and coincidentally, that's how he ends up in D2P. He ends up in Dragon Door pretty quickly because he wanted to work with he wanted to do stuff with Ultimo. He just was completely Kota Ibushi.
That's right. So in the midst of this tour, on November 2nd, Shima announces that due to the changes of the roster, Crazy Max would be disbanding effective November 28th. That same show, Taru announced that he would be leaving to, quote, take care of injuries. And Taru showed up in All Japan pretty much immediately after he left Dragongate, so those injuries must have gotten taken care of really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I this is the one where I'm not so certain if this is a Magnum thing, because Taru had a lot of fingers in a lot of pots. I mean, he's one of the reasons why
waste management, construction, etc.
Event promotion. I mean, he was part of Buku Dojo. He was the person in Buku Dojo that made the merger between WAR and Toryumon happen.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, is that with Okamura still in the fold, you would have imagined that Taru would have had an ally there, because they go back, even by this point, a decade.
Right, yeah. And I mean, so Taru's Taru. I mean, his track record kind of precedes himself. So not really a big surprise there. And when you think about how, at least I look at Crazy Max case, you already lost the heart of Crazy Max 3 months previously. Taru was most effective in his Yakuza suit, sitting at ringside, interfering. So, I mean, it made sense why he was, as the promotion kind of congealed, how he worked his way out of it. But notable loss still nonetheless.
So you lose Suwa, you lose Taru. Now you're losing the most identifiable unit in the history of the promotion. We'll get back to that in just a second. Quickly, the November 16th, 2004 Korakuen Hall show. Again, just to talk about these lineups. Opening match, Dragon Kid, Genki Horiguchi, and Ryo Saito versus Kines, Kenichiro Arai, and Susumu Yokosuka. Nothing wrong with that. Match 2, no contest. Shogo Takagi versus Super Shiso. We go downhill quick. The Florida brothers, they wrestled Johnson, Florida, and Magnum Tokyo. No buys there. You get a tag team match of the Iron Perms, Naoki Tanizaki and Second Doi. They defeated Shima and Shingo Takagi. After the match, Naruki Doi gave Naoki Tanizaki a Bakatari sliding kick. This paved the way for Naoki Tanizaki to be invited into Do Fixer, which is worth noting. Your semi-main event, Mori, Milano, and Yoshino defeated Sugawara, Owashi, and Yashi via DQ. And then your main event of a Korakuen Hall show, three-way dance, Masaki Mochizuki defeats Don Fuji and Shuji Kondo. This is not a good show.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, talking about Tanizaki, because he'll become a pretty important figure on the show that we will review. Tanizaki, it took him a long time to get into Do Fixer. He had a full trial series and wasn't accepted then. It's kind of the natural Dragongate thing of, oh, you failed, but then later on you're brought back in. But they pretty quickly, because of Tanizaki being the one Toryumon X guy who stuck around, they identified, oh, you're the youngest guy on the roster. Now you have Shingo Takagi here, who is the first True Blood the True-born rookie in that way. You're going to feud here. And I don't think a lot of people know that Shingo's first generational rival wasn't BB Hulk. It was Tanyon.
I say this about wrestlers here and there. Tanizaki is one of those guys where I feel like if we run his career 100 times, we might have gotten the worst version of it in real life.
I mean, he seems pretty content with it now.
He seems content with it. Just, again, we go back to that Toryumon X footage, and you go, wait, why are they running with Ishimori? Tanazaki's the best guy in this class, and then they basically hide those two. I mean, they never wrestle in Toryumon X, and it doesn't make any sense. And part of Tanazaki's problem is that he seems like a weird guy, and he left Dragongate to go be weird for a few years. And then they welcomed him back, and then things got weird again. And, now, he's been gone 10 years almost. He's been doing, micro indies for a decade now, which, again, he seems happy. I every time he pops up on tape, I go out of my way to watch it. I love him as a wrestler. It's just a bummer because you see obvious chemistry, especially with Shingo in 2005, where it's like, oh, God, why didn't we get way more of this? What we did not get any more of was on November 28th, we had the end of Crazy Gate. And this is a notable show. This is from Differ Ariake. The main event is Shima and Don Fuji defeating Kineska. I haven't seen this match in a very long time. I don't remember if it's any good or not. Mike, do you remember this match?
Not very well. It is a part of that SkyPerfect preview package, though. If you find,
so it's out there. This whole show is out there. It's Kondo and Yashi and Dragongate and Ryo Saito in the opener. Masaki Mochizuki and Shingo in their first singles match, and a hair versus hair match with Mori and Sugawara in the semi-main event. So I think it's worth noting at this time, you've lost Sua, you've lost Taro, and now you're losing Crazy Max. I have 2 points I want to make about this. Michael, I'll ask you this question first. Crazy Max existed from the very first Toryumon show. I mean, they existed in Michinoku Pro in 1998, all the way through this point in time. Can you explain how dramatic it would have been for Crazy Max to announce they were disbanding and then to eventually disband? What that impact might have had on a longtime Toryumon fan, especially after the brand change in the summer?
Well, I mean, it's the first major thing of hey, this was our through line and now it's gone away. Jay has talked about it on shows with us where when people go away and the way that things go away, and that is a thing that sheds fans just naturally because of how things go. And your hope is that the fan churn is positive and that the new thing will be something that fans latch on to or introduce new fans that are attracted by that new thing. The thing about Crazy Max is that it was the stable thing that really, if you're thinking about Toryumon turning into Dragongate, this brand new company, you knew it was essentially the same company. And one of the main reasons you knew why was because you had Crazy Max. So you're losing that foundational piece, and you're losing it in such a way where Shima and Fuji still remaining there, but you lost both the heart and the mood of the unit way before that. And this is after a time where, when we talk about Crazy Max, leading up, and I probably should have brought this up when we were talking about August 14, 2004 case, but, Crazy Max's story was you always had the core four, and then they kept on trying to find who would be the fifth. And there were so many fifths over the years. Shingo Takagi is a fifth. He ends up being the most successful fifth in his right because he sticks with Shima and Fuji, basically. But the problem is that when starting in August, you're starting to lose the core. And so it is such like it's not just that like they announce it at the beginning of November and then at the pay-per-view they disband. It really was a funeral march for 3 months in a lot of ways.
Very well said. I've always speculated the reason they brought back Natural Vibes was not that it was so incredibly popular during the first run with KZ, Genki, Susumu, Yashi, and Punch, but they brought it back at a time of great uncertainty in the world, in great uncertainty in the Japanese wrestling economy, and in this current future. And I, my own personal belief is that we're not living in a very hopeful time. And I think that's true of almost every country. We're not living in a hopeful time. And so what we're seeing with consumption habits is people don't want new. They don't want unfamiliar. They want comfort blankets. They want nostalgia. They want things that they're familiar with. And the reason that the Vibes branding came back was that in 2021, Dragongate was trying to throw anybody a lifeline of like, hey, you know what this is. It's okay to like this. You've had fond memories with this before. We're going to give you fond memories with this again. And all logic, all conservative logic would have pointed to, and I want to talk about, the how conservative Dragongate's booking was historically, but especially at this time when we get to this show review. But all logic would have said, keep Crazy Max together. Have this be the rock, the thing that people can lean on in times of uncertainty. At least we have Crazy Max. And they said no. And they disbanded the unit. And it's a really, really ballsy thing to do, especially, and this is the other thing that I'll throw to you, is Mike, by the end of 2004, can you describe what the unit landscape would have looked like? Because this is super relevant as we head into the show that we're going to review.
Yeah, so I don't have a chart in front of me, so I'm doing this off the top of my head, so please be
I can fill in the gaps. I got you.
Listeners. So you lost Crazy Max. What remnants of Crazy Max you would get were Shima, Fuji, and Shingo, and that they united with Super Shisa and not Hollywood at the time, just Stalker Ichikawa at the time, at this unit, this proto unit that was called Waku Waku Fujii Land. And that's all kind of intentional. That does kind of allude to some of the other Odiaba stuff in that kind of name. But and this was going to be a unit that in the brand new year, Shima would officially reveal his unit. But these are the 5 guys, and they're teaming as Waku Waku Fujii Land right now. So that's what happens with the Crazy Max people. You still have Do Fixer and Final M2K. They're pretty much, at least at the end of 2004, stable units. Don't worry about those 2 guys. Italian Connection, from where they were basically from the Aagan Issou split towards 2004, were existing as a 3-man trio of the Open the Dragongate champions, Milano Collection AT, Yoshino, and Anthony W. Mori. And then you have Aagan Issou. We're going to skip over Florida Brothers. Case has no interest in this. I could talk about the mask versus hair match where we revealed who Johnson Florida was on a different show. But you had Aagan Issou, who was, as listeners will know at this time, was the heel unit in 2004. That at this point, at the end of the year, they were completely booked into oblivion, even up to the last major pay-per-view of the year, and then the year would turn. Should we talk about Gate of Legend before we do that?
Yeah. So let's frame it this way: the first half of 2004 is loaded with heat. I would not always say hate, because I don't know if Aagan Issou always stuck the landing. I don't know if they always got the desired result, but it's loaded with heat. Kondo is presented as a dominant figure. Owashi is getting his own singles push. Yashi is respected in the booking. And then as Ultimo leaves and Dragongate becomes what they become, you very quickly start to see Aagan Issou getting less and less and less respect. And it's why 2004 Toryumon is a rather enjoyable promotion, and 2004 Dragongate is not the most exciting promotion because the heel unit is just not there. That really comes to a head 12/16/2004, the Gate of Legend. This was their second big show back in Yoyagi National Gymnasium, great venue. And you get, in the semi-main event, the Dragongate Championship match, where Mori, Milano, and Yoshino defend the belts against Aagan Issou. They win the match. The match is 15 minutes long, and it is a prolonged squash match. Italian Connection dominate. It is like the Harlem Globetrotters against the Washington Generals in this match. And at the time, people thought in real time that at the very least this seemed like the last match for Kondo. That ended up not being the case. But Mike, we've talked about this with Kaito Ishida before, where we both knew that Ishida was unhappy in Dragon Gate long before he left. And the Kondo thing, after this show, it became very clear that at the very least there were problems with him and the direction of this company.
Right. And it would become to be not just Kondo very, very quickly. And even within like I'm pulling up the card for the last show of the year, the traditional Fan Appreciation Day show. You look at that showcase, and you see Shogo Takagi, you see Toru Owashi, you see Takuya Sugawara. You see Yashi. You do not see Shuji Kondo.
Yeah, Kondo does.
Oh no, he's on that show.
He does, but he does a battle royal. I mean, it's,
right? Yeah, no, all of Aagan Issou are in this battle royal.
Exactly. So the other thing on Gate of Legend, there's the Masaki Mochizuki versus Shima singles match where Mochi wins the Dreamgate belt. Great match. Go watch it if you've never seen it. The opening match, just to set up context for what we will get into here in just a second. Final M2K, Kness and Second Doi. They defeated Don Fuji and Shingo Takagi, but you're talking about Second Doi as an opening match wrestler still. This would change, as Mike just referenced these fan appreciation shows at the end of the year. So at this point in time, they were doing 2 fan appreciation shows at the end of the year in Saitama. The first night, this was Christmas night, they did a one-night 10-man tag team tournament that wound up with Final M2K, Kness, Arakan, Mochi, Doi, and Susumu defeating the Italian Connection of Mori, Milano, and Yoshino, and also the Florida Brothers in the final match of that tournament. In the main event, Doi would pin Yoshino. That would lead to a singles match on 12/26 the next night, the other fan appreciation show, in which Yoshino beat Doi in a singles match. After that show, Doi would get on the mic. He would say that 2005 was going to be his year, and for it to be his year, he could no longer be a baseball player. As of 2005, he was changing his name from Second Doi back to Naruki Doi, and then they set up a Dragongate Championship match between the Italian Connection and Final M2K for the first show of 2005.
And then the Christmas party happens.
And here's where, much like in the same way that I think our understanding of the split, the 2004 split, has slightly changed over the last few years. And I think we've gotten a better idea of what the truth is and perhaps some color commentary that wasn't exactly accurate. We have the note that on December 31st, 2004, Aagan Issou was leaving Dragon Gate for, quote, dereliction of duty and poor conduct. Mike, before you explain the Christmas party, can you explain what you think happened here with Aagan Issou and with Dragon Gate?
Okay, complete conjecture, just what I have kind of come to the conclusion to 20 years later.
Yes.
Okay, hey, Aagan Issou, we need you to do this. No, we don't want to. Hey, Aagan Issou, we want you to do that. Nah. Hey, Aagan Issou, don't beat up Naoki Tanizaki. We like beating up Naoki Tanizaki. Hey, Aagan Issou, you have to stop doing this or you're going to get fired. Oh, you can't fire us. We quit. They don't agree on that last part.
This is entirely what I think happened. Explain the Christmas party side of this story now.
So in 2005, and it was kind of propagated basically up until the guys kind of got back into good graces, that there was a Gaora Christmas party that it was alleged that there was drunken misconduct at, and that was something that kind of came out after the dereliction of duty announcement. It was one of those things that was kind of like, oh, this was kind of the reason. It was attached to reasons why they were quote unquote fired. I don't know the validity of that now.
No, I think it was Fuji TV, actually. I think it was their partners in Odiaba. And the story that I always heard was that Yashi got particularly intoxicated, and Yashi started talking crazy and using profane language and being absolutely insane. And that was the final straw for Aagan Issou. As we sit here in 2025, I now don't believe that story. I don't think that happened. I think more than anything, they were at a fork in the road moment, and Aagan wasn't happy, and Magnum Tokyo and Dragongate were like, well, you can leave, and they said gladly, and we didn't see them in the promotion for 20 years. Or 15 years.
No, I think that's exactly where it is. What kind of happened. The 5 of them kind of end up floating around El Dorado, and they're teased for T2P, but it really becomes El Dorado, and then pretty quickly a lot of them kind of go their ways. Awashi ends up in DDT. Yashi, Kondo end up in All Japan with Taru. And I think
that they ended up in All Japan pretty quickly, didn't they? They come in All Japan,
but they were still a group as Aagan Issou, though, on the Indies.
That's right. Okay, so Voodoo Murderers come in to All Japan in March of 2005, and that's Kondo, Toru, and Yashi. But you're right. On the Indies, Aagan Issou was still a viable presence through part of El Dorado, at least. Yeah. So yeah.
They break up in El Dorado because it becomes the one unit that people were interested in, and then they make them all start their own units, and El Dorado dies very quickly because, they should have kept Aagan Issou. But yeah, and then everyone eventually from that group ends up to where, by and large, most of them kind of had work for up until 2018. Sugawara ends up in 0-1 pretty quickly. Jet Takagi does some DDT, but he's pretty much out of the business by 2006 or so.
That sounds about right.
Right, yeah. But it becomes very clear that this becomes like the big shedding, and this is like the big thing that as the calendar turns into 2005, there's now like this big open vast spot in the unit landscape chart where Aagan Issou used to inhabit in a role that Aagan Issou used to fulfill that no longer existed. And now the big problem happens where it's like, how do we figure out the landscape in 2005?
And I think just to put a bow on this in terms of the prolonged pain that we talked about with the Ultimo split and now what we see here with the OWE guys, Sugawara came back to Dragongate in 2009 and 2010, and I don't really have any context for what...
I don't know why, but I know he did.
I don't know why. It's not enjoyable when he's there. The whole thing is very odd. I feel like it's a pretty big blind spot in my Dragongate knowledge, simply because it's Sugawara and not, say, Kondo. If Kondo comes back in 2009 and 2010, I would be very up on everything that happened there, but I'm not. Yashi comes back in 2016, and as we talked about last week, he comes back at the beginning of 2016 when the promotion is red hot in Japan and in America. And when Yashi came back, Mike, that felt monumental. And that was Yashi.
Right, yeah. And so my memory of 2009, 2010, Takuya Sugawara, they did a short generation war where they put in basically everyone outside of like the first class of Toryumon versus what they would call second gen. And I think, if my memory, and again, I'm not pulling up Jay's website for this from 2009, but my memory is right. I think it was Genki brought out one of his peers, which he called Takuya Sugawara, and he agreed to kind of team up with them, and then very quickly turned heel. Mori retired. They did that kind of deal, and then Deep Drunkers. Yeah.
And then he was out of there before Blood Warriors versus Junction 3.
I don't even think he makes Team Doi.
No, I think he does.
Ugh.
I think he's he's contractually done in 2010. I don't think he makes it to January 2011.
Oh no, he's never a Metal Warrior. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then Kondo, the history of Kondo post 2004 is that he was separated from all of the Dragongate crew, and I think the first time that their paths ever crossed was that 20th anniversary Gaora show. And this was Kai. It's funny that Kai was in this match now, given what he's done. But it's Kai and Shuji Kondo against Tanizaki and Doi. And Doi and Kondo beat the shit out of each other in that match to a point that it gets borderline weird, and it never feels like, oh, they're shooting. they just hit each other so hard. And I think that fueled the fire of like, man, Kondo doesn't like these guys at all for another generation. What you got in 2018 was two different things before Kondo comes back to Dragongate in January of 2019. You get one in July. Strong Hearts come to Wrestle One, and I've got it pulled up here. It's one of my favorite matches that Strong Hearts have done post Dragongate. It actually might be my favorite Strong Hearts match post Dragongate.
Is this that tag?
It's the elimination tag in Korakuen. So it's Jun Tancho, Kaz Hayashi, Masayuki Kono, and Shuji Kondo against Shima, Lindemann, Gao Jinga, and T-Hawk. And you get Shima and Kondo in the ring for the first time in, at this point, 14 years. And the Wrestle One crowd knows it. They actually react to it, and it feels like a huge deal. That match is incredible. And then the next month, and I've referenced this on the show a million times, but Mochizuki and Shun went and did the All Japan Junior Tag League. And in that tag league, there's, this match that we were lucky enough to get on TV where it was Kotaro Suzuki and Kondo against Mochizuki and Skywalker from Shinkiba First Ring. And that match is like the match that we all watched and went, oh my God, Shun Skywalker is so much better than we realized. This guy's incredible. And that paved the way for Kondo to come back in January of 2019, which was at the time the 20th anniversary of Dragongate. And I remember in real time, and I'm sure you do too.
Oh yeah.
Now Kondo's he's a roster member and he's softened in his old age. I still think he's a very good wrestler, but we have lost the, oh shit, Shuji Kondo's in Dragongate because he's just there all the time. In 2019, Mochizuki versus Kondo was a huge match. That was a big deal. And that has kind of been lost in history a little bit just because, again, Kondo assimilated very quickly. He started being on every Korakuen from almost there on out and then joined the company full-time in 2020. But in 2019, that was a big match.
Right, yeah, and that was part of the 20th anniversary / Mochizuki's 25th anniversary. It was like, oh, we're bringing in Shuji Kondo. And then everyone's like, hey, good feelings, 20th anniversary. And that kind of started the road to Masato Yoshino begging Ultimo to come back. And remember that, like, it was pretty well known that he was going to jump, like, pretty quickly, like, to the point of before everything shut down in March of 2020, it was pretty much anticipated that he would be at least, if not signed before, he would be the big surprise, and King of Gate 2020 was going to be Shuji Kondo as X.
That's right. I completely forgot about that, but you're exactly right.
That was something that was, at least I can only speak for myself, well aware of, like, 6 months beforehand that was going to happen. Like, and his was a big deal for, like, it was like, oh yeah, no, Shuji Kondo, and everyone was kind of waiting for that, and then he eventually comes out as a big surprise in KBS Hall on, I think it was July 4th, 2020.
I'm looking at it now. It was July 5th because...
Oh, 1 day late. Damn.
But I was going to bring this up, and I'm glad you remember this as well, is Kondo was signed in 2020, and so they do 2 nights in Kyoto. These are their first shows back with fans because they did the Empty Arena King of Gate and then, like, Rainbow Gate shows on top of that. And then they come out in July with Hopeful Gate 2020. And so, I mean, this July 2020, we're in the thick of COVID. And the first show, it was Doi and Yoshi and Kondo against Eita, Hyo, and Yoshida. And then the next night, it was announced that Dragon Kid was going to team with Shuji Kondo. They were wrestling Ben-K and Jason Lee. And I think I stayed up and watched this show live because, 1, it was COVID, nothing mattered. But 2, everybody thought that Kondo was turning heel and that this Dragon Kid tag team was a ruse. He was going to join RED. We're going to be off to the races. And that didn't happen. Instead, Kondo joined the Toryumon generation.
Yeah, instead, he kind of eased his way to wrestling part-time. It ended up being what we now really saw with Toru Washi this year. That's like, oh no, actually, things are great, and now we're just all kind of settling in and, wrestling our friends for the last few times, and then we're going to, retire.
January 9th, 2005. These are our last notes before we get to this show. At the start of this show, this is in Nagoya, President Okamura comes out and says, yes, it's true, Aagan Issou is gone because Dragongate takes their conduct very seriously, And had Shima or Mochizuki done what they did, they would also be gone, which is, I just think something worth noting there. Two things on this show happen. One, the main event, the Italian Connection defends their Dragongate belts, Mori Milano and Yoshino. They beat Kness, Doi, and Susumu. And after the match, Doi is visibly frustrated with Final M2K. What was actually more important was the opening match on this show. Genki Horiguchi, Magnum Tokyo, and Ryo Saito. They defeated the Waku Waku Fujii Land trio of Shima, Don Fuji, Super Shisa, with the finish being Ryo Saito pinning Shima. And ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to January 14th, 2005.
Absolutely. So we have that really fun, as we move to the show, the SkyPerfect feed goes through November and December, like I mentioned earlier. And then we start, and then they mostly then go to Waku Waku Fujii Land. First, it's about Crazy Max disbanding, Waku Waku Fujii Land, and then Mochi being the first or the second Dreamgate champion. The show starts up with Waku Waku Fujii Land coming out with a really funny song. Like the music is important here, but they have a Waku Waku Fujii Land theme. They have a banner waver, and it is only Shima, Shingo, and Don Fuji and Super Shisa out there. They're all noticeably wearing these pleather tank tops that say Blood Generation and track pants. Shima kind of stumbles and reveals that Blood Generation is their name, and then he goes through and Don Fuji and Shingo Takagi hold up like these tearaway signs. He's listing out the precepts of Blood Generation. In case, do you want to take it from here to explain kind of what happened?
Yeah, so I guess I should have very clearly noted this. I know you said this, but I want to make sure that it gets noted that the draw going into this January 14th, 2005 show was that Shima was going to unveil his new unit. It was known ahead of time he was coming to this show with a unit concept and with a unit, but nobody knew what it was going to be. In real time, the thought process among people on the internet was that it was going to be Aagan Issou, that it was all a giant swerve, and that Shima was going to lead the next heel unit. That is not what happened. Shima comes out with Fuji and Shingo and Shisa, like you just said, and announces that Blood Generation is his new unit. The unit concepts are strength, so Stalker Ichikawa is not allowed in their unit. Pure Blood, which I believe meant at the time no outsiders, that would get broken later, as well as maskless. And so Super Shisa would not be allowed in the unit unless he reverted back to all caps Saito. Super Shisa disagreed. He wanted to keep his mask, and that left Shima, Shingo, and Fuji as your three members of Blood Generation. Mike, at no point in this promo, and again, this is going to be a language barrier thing, but it doesn't come across like a heelish promo.
Not at all.
Now, Naoki Tanizaki comes out. He confronts Shingo Takagi. They have a basic back and forth. I'm the best young wrestler. No, I'm the best young wrestler. But divorced of Tanizaki coming out, this is a jovial, fun opening segment. Nobody has any idea what they're in store for.
Right, yeah, that's the coolest thing about this, is that it's going to get real dark real quickly, and everything's being played for jokes here. Like Shima going, no, you got to take off your mask. It was not like it was not heelish Shima doing it. It's like, no, man, you got to take off your mask. You want to do this, you got to be Saito. Like, we're doing strength, true blood, clean face. Those are the three precepts here. You want to be with us, you got the shirt on. Come on, you got to unmask here. And the crowd was just laughing along with it, and they kind of come to a little bit of a thing where it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is not going to come to pass. So we'll have Blood Generation versus Shisa. Genki comes out with basically to pull back Tanyan. He gets looped into it. And then, of course, Tanyan is getting into Shingo's face. That's our main event for the night. And then they come out to this Blood Generation theme that, no exaggeration, I need to ask you something, Case, and this is an actual generational question. Did you ever play No Mercy?
No.
Okay, so the menu music in No Mercy is very notorious as just kind of like this bass line and then DJ scratching and then a voiceover track. That is essentially what we get for the Blood Generation proposed theme here, as they are walking to the back. Still, we think this is a face unit as it's being portrayed right now, and it's like blood generation. And it's just like on repeat there for like for like 30 seconds there before you get into the first match. Cracked me up.
While we're talking about wrestling theme songs, I have to issue a public apology really quick. On this show before, I have complained about not getting invited to do Andrew Rich's Music of the Mat podcast to a point that I kind of started going, what the fuck? Why am I not on this show? Andrew Rich has reached out to me twice in recent months to do the show, and my schedule has not worked out. But rest assured, folks, I will eventually do Music of the Mat, even though I don't care about wrestling theme songs.
Case will do Music of the Mat this year, and Joe Gagney will be doing a voice gate this year.
Joe Gagney's doing voice gate. I don't know when.
We don't know when or where.
What. I have no ideas for Joe Gagney. One of the great things about Joe Gagney is, one, he's great mind, never has a bad take. I love him.
You can set your watch to his takes. His takes are perfect.
I love it. I have been consuming Joe Gagney content for over a decade now. I do not know what he looks like, and I have no desire to know what he looks like. In my head, Joe Gagney in real life looks like his Twitter avatar, and I never want to see a photo of him.
I will not disabuse you of this, even though I have seen Joe Gagney.
I have no idea what he looks like.
Yep.
I hope to never meet him in person. He's a great guy. Seems like a great family man. Super, super agreeable and respectable. Does great content. I never want to meet this guy.
I mean, I kind of feel like that's how I like Cubs. I have a certain thing about Cubs. It's just like, oh yeah, no, like it's like Cubs, you know?
Yeah, the only time it would be incorrect for me to say that I've met Cubs. I was at an AAW show with Ultimo Dragon many years ago, and I was with Rich Craich, and this guy, the only way I can describe it is this guy walked by, and Rich goes, "That's Cubs fan." I go, "That's Cubs fan?" Like, the most important man we have in Lucha Libre? He goes, "Yeah, that's Cubs fan." I go, "Holy shit." And that was 7 years ago, and I have not seen Cubs since.
Just disappearing into the mist.
Oh my god, it was jarring at the time. I would love Cubs. I've been trying to get to a galley show that he's at. It has not worked out, but I hope to see Cubs in 2025. Joe Gagney, I hope I never see this man. All right, Mike, we have an opening match to talk about. I will give you the keys as you run down these matches.
All right, so we kick off the show with Do Fixer, Dragon Kid, and Magnum Tokyo versus Masaki Mochizuki and now Naruki Doi of Final M2K. And and throughout this match, you get a lot of great stuff here. DK does one of the more interesting delayed leg cells I ever got. Case at this time they were doing the Do Fixer umbrella dance as their big dance here. It's a great match, and then we have the finish. So Masaki Mochizuki holds up someone. I think it was Dragon Kid at this point.
It was Dragon Kid.
Yeah, holds up Dragon Kid for a sliding kick, and then Doi turns directions basically as he's running and redirects it, kicks Masaki Mochizuki in the face with the first time I have it marked as Bakatari that was called by announcers as the Bakatari sliding kick. This brings out Blood Generation, who immediately beat down on all parties, and Naruki Doi takes the microphone and he announces that he is now a member of Blood Generation. And throughout all of this, Magnum Tokyo gets mad, and they set up now the real main event for this January 14th, 2005 Korakuen. It is going to be Blood Generation. Shima, Don Fuji, Shingo Takagi, and Naruki Doi versus Dragon Kid, Magnum Tokyo, Genki Horiguchi, and Super Shisa, 2 out of 3 falls.
I said last week that the December 1st, 2016 match between the class of 2016 and Team Veteran was one of the 10 most important matches in Dragongate history. This is also one of the 10 most important matches in Dragongate history, and I have a list for you, Mike, if you would like to hear my top 10.
Yeah, give me your top 10. I have about 3 that I was able to come up with. I want to see a great matchup. Okay.
All right. And I before I continue this list, I want to note real quick the great thing about the Doi turn is this match, it's a weird, it's hard to watch this when you know what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, this entire show feels like, oh wait, we're waiting for this to happen. We're waiting for this to happen.
The opening match is kind of this meandering tag match that doesn't have the sense of urgency that you would expect. Maybe not from Doi at this time, and maybe not from Magnum, but from Mochizuki and Dragon Kid. You watch this like you're almost like poking them, like come on, like do something, and then the turn happens, the way the turn is set up, the way that he hits the kick is brilliant. The other thing that is so great about this is, you're right, Blood Generation comes out, but Doi hits the Bakatari sliding kick on Mochizuki, and then he looks towards the entryway, and he starts waving like, come on, and then Blood Generation comes out, and it's all this great ruse, and it's just... Like, we were talking about, Doi, he was second Doi, and he was in Final M2K, and he was working opening matches. I mean, Mike, he's like the forgotten guy of the T2P class at this time period. He's nothing. I was trying to think of what's the... Again, I'll get to this list in a second. What's the roster contemporary? Is it UT? This would be like if UT turned heel and became a main event heel in one night.
Yeah, I mean, the most contemporary thing, and I think was like the number one match that I would have said on this list, is Akira Tozawa coming back from excursion.
That's another good one. That's on my list. But in terms of the 2025 roster,
yeah, that's the thing. Like, you would have to have like Rita, like then like snapping and just choking everyone out.
But Rita in 2024, I think, was more respected in the booking, like way
True.
more respected in the booking than Doi was in 2004.
Daiki Yanagiuchi snapping and choking everyone out.
That would be another one. It was almost like, would it be Kagatora? Just a guy who had been there and was just around. That's the vibe of this Doi turn, because again, he misses the T2P debut show because he's hurt. He comes in 2002 and is a mid-card T2P wrestler, which makes him a low-card Dragongate wrestler or Toryumon wrestler by the time those promotions merge. And I asked this question, and partially in jest, but somebody tell me your favorite Naruki Doi Toryumon moment. It's not there. He was a complete non-factor in the booking. He was a guy that everybody would have thought he just didn't have it. Yoshino was there, Milano was there, Mori was incredibly successful at this time period. You obviously have your initial class and your second class. And Doi was one of those guys that was on the boat, but he wasn't driving the ship. And all of a sudden, Naruki Doi is not only a guy, but part of my French, Naruki Doi is a motherfucker. It's just this rechristening that happens all in the blink of an eye. And it's obviously aided by the fact that we know what was to come and that we know it was a critical and commercial success. But the mechanics of this turn are incredible. And I think it's partially what sets up this great 2005. So, Mike, I'll run through all of these 10 matches, and then you tell me if you had those three as well, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
So I would have this match. I would have, obviously, the Rookies versus Veterans match that I mentioned last week. Blood Generation versus Do Fixer 33106. Yamato versus Shingo from August 23rd, 2013. This is when Shingo lost the belt in his first defense. And that
the
match...
Almighty.
It not only brings us the Almighty Yamato, it officially kicks off the... We love Shima. We love Mochizuki. This is not their time. This is the big six is actually finally here. And that happens with that match. And that was a gutsy match in a booking decision that broke Brad Garoon. And it was fucking ballsy. The entire thing was incredible. So I would have that match. I would have Shima versus Yamato from January 20th, 2010. This is one that in the moment, maybe not incredibly influential. 15 years removed, this is the match that Yamato proved he could be a main eventer of.
Yep, no, that was a really big one. I think 3306 was one of mine. I'm
sorry, I took a breath there.
Sorry.
I told you what I was going to do, and then I didn't do what I was going to do, so I apologize. But I'll finish out this list here. I also had Dai Inferno and Diamante versus Dragon Dai and Shun Skywalker from December 1, 2021. I have the 8-14-01 trios match because that's the first televised three-way trios match they did. I have Blood Warriors versus what would become Junction 3, the Akira Tozawa return from June 8th, 2011. Pac and Eita versus BB Hulk and Shingo Takagi from October 2nd, 2018. And I really debated on this number 10. There's a few matches that I was kicking around. I think even with what has happened with SB Kento, I think the Toryumon versus RED unit disbands match at Final Gate 2020 is still, when you talk about all of these matches, they have legacy, and they have influence. And I still think, even with Kento gone, that match is incredibly influential.
Yeah, that was the one that I was going like, do I have Final Gate 2020 on the list? And it kind of comes down to a hard place with this. So I will tell you two matches that I had that were not on your list, but by and large, I think that those encapsulate, especially, I mean, 12/1/2021. I mean, that if we're talking about what started the current era, like that was the thing that I kind of struggled with this. I was like, no, it's when Daya got turned on by Shun Skywalker. That's what kicked off the modern era of Dragon Gate as we know it. I think the Dead or Alive cage match from 2016 when Yamato does the full face turn.
That's a good one.
Is a really important one because at that time, and it's like an interesting thing about basically 2016 to present is that was a moment where Yamato became something more than the Big Six, really. And I think that that still very much is, I mean, that's the case of the promotion right now, right? Like, I mean, he at that point becomes essentially a company ace. And to me, that was one of those big transformative matches. And one that I think like changes a lot of kind of, it maybe now it's less irrelevant than it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I think the Dangerous Gate 2014 not 2014, sorry. Oh no, that was Dangerous
Matt
Gate
Blakey Jimmy's was 2015.
2015. That's what I was thinking. I was like, no, because Berserk starts the fall of 2015. Yeah, it's the Dangerous Gate All Out War loser must disbands match because of at least clearly defining that was the end of one heel continuity, and then we'd start a new one that still exists to this day.
It's a really interesting pick. I hadn't thought about that, but I like that reasoning because you and I have made this point before that there's direct lineation from Berserk to Antios to RED. Zebrats has evolved so much that it feels like at this point in time, Zebrats feels completely divorced from RED. But the lineage
it's
is that they're related in a way that Mad Blanky and Berserk were not. That's really interesting.
And then if you want to go like, okay, Mad Blanky into Blood Warriors, into Team Doi, into Deep Drunkers, into Real Hazard, into Muscle Outlaws, into Blood Generation.
Yeah, I had not thought about that match. I would like to know what other people think.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting topic.
And it's one of, like, we could come back to this and do a whole episode on this, but it's really, when you talk about the overall legacy of a match and then the influence of the match, what are the Dragongate and Toryumon matches that really, really matter? Because I thought about Milano versus Saito from the T2P show because it's something that I think changed the course of history. 8/14/01, the three-way match changed the course of history. Blood Generation versus Doofixer from Ring of Honor felt far more in America than in Japan, but it was felt so much in America that it changed part of Dragon Gate's business practice. Incredibly, incredibly influential matches. Matt Blanky versus Jimmy's is an interesting one. I had not thought about that. But this Doi turn here, I mean, we don't need to get into one of the most important angles in the history of Dragon Gate, but I would have this maybe at the very top of the list. It's just, it's art, and it's one of those things that, people that watch this show in real time remember thinking, oh shit, and then you can watch this match knowing what's going to happen. If you've never seen it before and you've just heard about it, or if you've seen it before, the reaction is still the same every time. As soon as Doi turns, it is just this, oh shit. And the crowd has this feeling throughout the rest of the card that is like a mystery vortex show on steroids. Because even though everything else that happens goes according to plan, it's Florida Brothers, Stalker, this Saito Milano match, which maybe surprised people with the finish, and then the main event. It's all what was on paper. There are no other big surprises on this show, but leaving the opening match, it felt like anything in the world could have happened on that show.
Yeah, so let's at least I'll talk us through up until the Italian Connection Nesca match.
Please,
I'll take the wheel here. Just thinking about, so just play my cards on the table. The version of the show I have, it was one that I had ripped a long time ago that was on 2 DVDs, basically. The whole entire first DVD it is basically the opening angle, this match. The angle after that And then you get Florida Brothers versus Kenichiro Arai. It's a Florida Brothers match. The one thing that's really worth noting, the two things really worth noting, there's a backflip contest that Daniel Florida was afraid of, and referee Yagi's having the best time. The finish is the Florida Brothers win by KO when Aagan tries to do an arm wringer to the outside, and they act like that Michael Iwasa's arm gets ripped off, and they have the fake arm going around that as soon as Kenichiro Arai saw it, he faints, and it's a KO. They carry Aagan to the back, which queued up Stalker Ichikawa, who was immediately just like kind of oblivious to what was happening with Blood Generation and Waku Waku Fujii Land, and was really aggravating Daniel and Michael, and that brought out Akira Hokuto wearing USA shorts. At this time, she's fully embraced being a member of the overall Florida Brothers universe. You get Stalker Ichikawa versus Akira Hokuto. That is 5 stars, no notes. Akira Hokuto wins in a minute with the Northern Lights bomb. So you essentially have about an hour 15 of just this kind of stuff before you get into the meat of the card with Italian Connection. They open the Triangle Gate, 2/3 of the first champion team, Yoshino and Anthony W. Mori versus Susumu Yokosuka and Kness. That's right, that's Kineska. And you have Susumu Yokosuka penning Mori, so getting a direct win over the Triangle Gate champions, right, fresh off of already having challenged them before, in a really kind of fun, compact tag match.
Yeah, it's a match that's very of a time in the sense that it's uniquely these guys' in-ring style. I don't really think anybody on the roster right now can have this sort of match because it feels so unique to what exactly they're doing. I really like this match as it gets going down the finishing stretch.
Oh, God. Yeah. Mori and Susumu have always had excellent chemistry.
Mori is really good.
And and the finish.
Yeah. I started thinking here because Mori plays a huge role in 2005. And so in a way, Mori is involved in one of the great periods of this promotion. Had Mori debuted just a little bit later, because the reason he retires is his body's broken down by 2010. But if he makes it into like 2013, 2014, I would have liked to have seen Mori wrestle that era of Eita, and I'm bummed we never got that.
Oh yeah, and if somehow you could take him in 2004 and drop him into 2024 in Lapis Hall and say, "Hey, UT, go have fun."
Yeah, exactly.
He really had that. I mean, he was such like a unique presence, and yeah, bless his heart. I mean, with a size like that, he just bumps his ass off like that. Jumbo
Always
Nokachi,
bumped like crazy.
That Jumbo Nokachi near fall in the finish was sick. Like Mori takes it completely on the base of his skull and his neck.
I also would like to challenge any wrestler listening, and I know we have some. Masato Yoshino does a move in this match, and he would do it throughout his career. He does the double tornado DDT where he's on the middle rope and he leaps as if he's going to do a tornado DDT that we all know, but has an extra degree of spin, so he bounces off of the middle rope and then actually does a tornado DDT. Then somebody do that. I would like to see that move be done. That is one of the best looking moves I've ever seen.
Yeah, gosh. One of the things that was really striking me on this show, and especially if like something that I wanted to ask you later on, I'll just ask you here because that's Yoshino doing unique things into Yoshino. Did Dragon Kid invent the Sundog Millionaire?
I think so.
So that's another move that Dragon Kid created that everyone steals now. Okay.
Yeah, no,
cool. Was
Was
anyone else doing it before 2005?
There would have been no All Japan Juniors doing it. I can't think of a New Japan guy that did it. And it doesn't seem like something that if anybody was doing it on the US Indies, they weren't doing it consistently. And obviously it's a stunner, so it wasn't being done on TV at that point in time. No. So upon further review, yeah, I'm gonna give it to Dragon Kid for now.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out between Yoshino and Tanahashi who did the first Sling Blade, but I felt pretty good about that one.
I feel like Yoshino's got him beat on that.
I think he does, personally.
Yeah. No, it was, between last week watching the 2016 show and this week watching this 2005 show, it was fun watching not near-death Masato Yoshino. I kind of forgot how much I enjoyed that.
Yeah, Yoshino is one of the 100 greatest wrestlers of all time. in my mind.
I think he's one of the 50. He's
Yep.
comfortably in my top 50, but it's a little. I talk about this with Ultimo a lot, where we've existed with old man Ultimo for 20 years now. Post arm surgery Ultimo, let's say, that you forget that at one point he was absolutely incredible. And the Yoshino thing, I mean, we watched 3 full years of injured neck, injured spine, praying he gets to the next match Masato Yoshino.
Sleeping in the bathtub.
And that was 3 years ago that he retired. So it's been a really long time since we've consumed any sort of prime Masato Yoshino content. And over the last 2 weeks, it's been like, that's right. I like the guy. Did you see that he's now a business partner in a new restaurant?
Oh, no, he's had the rice ball, the onigiri restaurant, for almost half a year now.
Okay, yeah, because Samurai Del Sol is in Japan training with Shima. I would imagine charging money for bookings that even New Japan couldn't afford. If I know Samurai Del Sol the way I think I do, he's probably too rich for Glate's blood, which is a Del Sol problem and not a Glate problem.
Yeah, no, because Yoshino opened that, I feel like, in August, because also, who was also at that restaurant a couple days ago?
Who?
Konamawa Ichikawa.
That's right. I posted that photo in the Dragongate channel on the Voices of Wrestling Discord. Yoshino and Shima and Ichikawa got together, which, you know what, makes me happy.
Yeah, you know what? It's nice to see that. I did see, though, that Samurai Del Sol did also train with Masato Yoshino, so I hope he enjoys that experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it was awesome.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was great.
So another note before we get into the next match, again, talking about versions of the show, they showed the Cyrio and Milano match from Discombarmento during the intermission, leading us to the semi-main event case. It was a number 1 contendership match. They did not do a key adventure match, thank God. Ryo Saito versus Milano Collection AT. Ryo Saito gets the win with the Dragonfly Dragon Suplex. In case we don't get matches like this often.
No, there's just an insane palpable energy to this match that is really hard to describe if you haven't seen it before.
Yeah, it's been years since I've watched this match, and I was immediately going like, was this a 5-star match maybe in the building? It had to be. If you were there, you would be flipping out, because the Korakuen crowd at this time, you start to see right here, this is the start of the Ryo Saito failed ace push.
Well, it's one of the times that we've seen this. Dragongate throughout their history has been able to make stars in one night in ways that I don't feel like any other promotion's been able to do. And I started thinking, okay, well, who are the guys that have been made in one night? And it's, the one that we always point to is Takahiro Yamamura in 2017. I think Akira Tozawa, June 8th, 2011, when he comes back from Excursion, he was not the same Akira Tozawa that left for North America, and he became a star in one night. TN Revolution in 2023 became a star in one night. Milano Collection AT in 2001 became a star in one night, and you see it here with Ryo Saito. And if you've never watched 2005 Dragongate, even a little bit of it, but especially all the way through, Ryo Saito in 2005 is one of the best wrestlers in the world. And 2005 is one of, if not the best in-ring year in wrestling history. Saito is every bit as good as Shima. He's every bit as good as Mochizuki. He's the best wrestler in Do Fixer. He is unfathomably, it's hard to say. He's so good that it's hard to say, Mike. It's incredible. And it all kicks off with this match. And Milano's Milano. We'll talk about him in a second. Saito holds up his end of the bargain, though.
Yeah, and I feel like that he was able to get himself into the positions where Milano looked like an absolute monster in this match. A key moment for me was when Saito looks like he's about to springboard back into the ring. He's from the apron, and then Milano does one of his jumping enzuigiris, and the way that Saito sells it is he kind of like falls flat on his ass to the floor, and it is wild. And it is a story of now Ryo Saito feeling like he has this guy's number and being such a different wrestler than he was 4 years ago, trying and being able to kind of power his way through Milano Collection AT, being at some of the most tricky, vicious Milano Collection AT you will ever see.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Milano is is really, really physical in this match.
He's
and
brutal.
It hit me specifically this time watching this match that it's sad because it's the second to last Milano Dragongate match we have on TV. And it's the last one that means anything. The February TV, I think he's in like an 8-man, or I guess it would be a 6-man tag of the Italian Connection. He's in just some 6-man tag match. And then he's gone. And I started thinking about him and Saito and all of their history from the first T2P show to now. And it's one of the things that even the most lapsed Dragongate fan will compliment this promotion on is, everything always matters. For years, Shingo and BB Hulk were side-eyeing each other if they weren't outright punching each other in the face. And there's all this lore, right? It's hashtag cinema. We got cheated out of more chapters of Saito and Milano, where eventually they probably would have teamed. They probably would have won a Summer Adventure Tag League, and then we would have seen another turn, and it would have been Saito as the heel and Milano as the babyface. And it's such a shame that this is the end of this. Now, in a storybook perspective, it works out nicely because this acts as Milano's write-off, and the guy that Milano had dominated the most won this match and then went on to have this amazing 2005 and then sadly this disappointing 2006. But in the big picture, man, it is such a bummer that this is the last time these two guys ever shared a ring in a way that really mattered.
Yeah, and especially like talking about like how generational feuds kind of like, I mean, at this time, you see Akira Tozawa all over the show as a ring guy. You don't see BB Hulk here, so it's a very at ringside. It's a very like interesting portrait into a time where like things weren't as stable. I mean, you're still dealing after 5 very tumultuous months at this point, and very quickly, I mean, Milano would get injured. February 23rd, I think it was. Or thereabouts.
I think it's maybe even earlier, but the point stands. It's February when it happens.
Yeah, and then they vacate the title, and it completely. Well, they vacate, they make interims, and then it becomes official essentially. Yeah. And this is really it for Milano. It's really kind of a stark thing. Like he's someone who does not make it very far into Dragongate proper. He goes, and then he ends up in America for a bit, discovers his love of Pringles, and then he ends up in New Japan.
Yeah, you lose Sua, giant loss. You lose Taru, not a big loss, but a guy who had been there since the beginning, and probably a bigger loss behind the scenes than in front of the camera.
A through line loss, like the stability loss there.
Yeah, you lose Aagan Issou, which give or take how much that means to you, and then you lose Milano, and it's the Dragongate podcast. We don't need to compliment them more than we already do, but for them to survive that, let alone thrive in the way that they did. Something that Jay always says is he goes, it's a shame that Milano left, but one of the great blessings of it is it actually is why 2005 is so great. It throws all of their booking into disarray, and through World, because after World things settled down and Kishiwada comes in, and I love Magnitude Kishiwada, but the second half of the year feels a little bit different than the first half. But from January through July of 2005, this promotion is fucking chaos every time. Every show, there's something insane happening, and that doesn't happen if Milano sticks around. There might have been craziness, but not in the way that we got it, especially February, March, April, May, June. It's a completely asinine time for the promotion in the best way possible.
And you know what kind of kicks off the batshitness?
This main event, 2 out of 3 falls. Blood Generation, Shima, Don Fuji, Naruki Doi, Shingo Takagi versus the Do Fixer and joint team of Magnum Tokyo, Genki Horiguchi, Dragon Kid, and Super Shisa. And we start off with Blood Generation coming out to the real Blood Generation theme. It's not the Blood Generation. It's the actual Blood Generation theme that they would have for like the vast majority of their tenure, and the full Blood Generation entrance. You had Shima with his bendy bar. You had Shingo with his push-up bars. You had Doi with elastic bands, and you had Fuji with like the grip thing. You had Blood Generation, and as soon as Do Fixer tries to make it to the ring, Blood Generation
attacks them in the entranceway, and we start brawling to start this crazy match.
So this is one of the best singular CIMA matches that I've ever seen. The only comparison that I have is I always go back to WrestleMania weekend 2007. So not the first WrestleMania weekend that Dragongate is there, but the second one when everybody's expecting them.
In Detroit,
In Detroit, the first night they do 8-man tag, Dragongate versus Ring of Honor. It's fine. The second night, they do the Dragongate 6-man tag. And again, this is 1 year after the first one. Everybody there is there to see that match. And they do all the introductions, and Shima's the last name they introduce. And when they introduce Shima, it sounds like Hulkamania in that building. And Shima gets this look in his eyes. And at that moment, it is so real to him. It is so intense, and he is so in the zone. And really, one of the only other times that I've seen that is this match. Shima is otherworldly in this match. And Shisa's great, and Shingo's great, and Doi's great, Dragon Kid's great. Great match. This is the Shima show. Everything that Shima does is so unbelievably captivating, and it is the type of thing in both America and in Japan that is just missing right now. There is no one, even Shun Skywalker, there is no one in Japan that I trust right now to replicate what Shima did in this match, and it's the biggest problem that they have. There are not enough alphas in wrestling right now that can take this match with all these big stars, all these big angles, all this crowd, all this fervor, and go, I'm going to be the fucking star in this match. Watch me. And I was floored. I've seen this match 5 times probably. I was floored this time around by just how good Shima was, Mike.
And he's like, just when you say like he like commands this match, he is literally directing Fuji and Doi in this match to do moves. Like, it's not even just like his actions in this. Shima and Shisa have amazing chemistry.
They're absolutely incredible. And there's a moment, it's before the first, it actually kind of leads to the first fall, where the ring empties out, and so Shima and Shisa enter the ring at the same time. And all Shima does, all he does is hit him with a drop kick, but he comes in the ring so fast, and it looks like he hits him so hard, and then he poses to the crowd. And that is the art of this whole thing. And we're not going to go on a Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame diatribe here. I have to get out of here in a minute. But it's why him not getting in for all those years drove me insane, because people would be like, well, what about his singles matches? And it doesn't matter. He can do this. Find me other wrestlers that can do this. It doesn't exist anymore.
In case, as soon as Shima hit that pose, I think that there was a realization within the audience that, oh, we're going to be okay now.
I think that's a great point. I mean, you think about this. If you're somebody in Tokyo in 2005 and you went to all the great shows in 2001 and you went to all the great shows in 2002 and 2003 had great matches, and you made it through the split, and maybe you're not feeling good about things heading into the show between the Saito win, which cannot be understated. There's this great hopeful moment, this clear, hey, we've got a new main event babyface for you to care about, and then the heel stuff with Blood Generation. How you could not be captivated is completely beyond me.
Yeah, and then I'm going to run through the falls real quick.
Yeah, please.
So right after they get back in the ring, it's a real quick first fall. Shima really brutally spikes Shisa with a brutal Schwein to get the first fall. Then they actually have a prolonged match section. Another amazing Shima and Shisa sequence leads to Shima trying to go for a second Schwein. But then Shisa turns it into the Yoshi tonic to square it at 2-2. And then the final fall, you have probably the best reversal of an Ultra Hurricane Rana I have ever seen, because Dragon Kid goes all the way down and through Naruki Doi's legs. Naruki Doi then picks him up, does the Doi's fives with him into the Bakatari sliding kick to get the win for Blood Generation to win this match. In the post-match, and Final MTK hit the ring immediately to get after Doi, and Blood Generation and Final MTK make just big overtures over the next Triangle Gate challengers. And what a fucking war this is. And good Magnum performance in this. Like, Magnum was not an active Detractman in 2005 in this match.
No, there's a Magnum Shingo sequence where he's just kicking the life out of Shingo. And
Rookie
it's like,
Shingo rules. Rookie Shingo is so good.
Well, because it's the only time in his career where he was really able to be beat down like this, but he's still Shingo. So it's almost like, punching the Incredible Hulk. Like, at some point he's going to get angry and fire back.
Yeah, so it's a incredible match. I was 4 3/4 on this view with this. Just keeping this in mind. This is one of those, I know we talked about earlier about transformative matches, Naruki Doi turning. This show is just so transformative because you end the show and you have, okay, Naruki Doi is now the new young hot heel. He's with Shima. It's great. He's with Fuji's there. Takagi's there. We have a good heel unit. And then you have who is Masaki Mochizuki have up next? Well, Ryo Saito now is a made man, and that's what's happening. So after those 5 months, you're going home on that note, and the company feels stabilized.
It's absolutely nuts. They go on this run. In February, you have Mochi versus Saito and Hakata Star Lanes for the Dreamgate belt, one of my favorite, and I know your favorite Dreamgate defenses of all time.
Just incredible.
You get Milano's. I'm looking at it now because I got notes on all my 2005 Dragon Gate stuff. Shima, Don Fuji, Naruki Doi, and Shingo Takagi versus Mori, Milano, Yoshino, and Shisa, which is February 12th, 2005. That's Milano's final televised TV match, final televised Dragon Gate match. That match is awesome. You roll into the February Korakuen where you get Blood Generation versus M2K. March, we talked about that is the Brave Gate tournament show. That is such a great show with that really underappreciated Mori, Hulk, and Magnum versus Shima, Fuji, and Shingo match. April is the first time that you have a Korakuen show that isn't headlined by Shima, Magnum, Milano, or Mochi. It's Genki, Dragon Kid, and Ryo Saito versus Kines, Susumu, and Nakajima. That's super fun. As you go throughout the year, I always highlight the June 22nd card is one of the better Dragon Gate Korakuen shows in history. It's Mochi, Kines, and Aagan versus Fuji, Yoshino, and Doi. So Yoshino turns heel like we talked about at the Brave Gate show, or shortly after. Shingo versus Naoki Tanizaki. We get that match finally in June. Akira Tozawa versus Katsuhiko Nakajima. And then Dragon Kid, Genki, and Saito versus Mori, Hulk, and Magnum. There's a number one contendership match between Taka, Michinoku, and Susumu Yokosuka, it's actually better than the Taka versus Mochizuki match at World. And then the main event was promoted as Shima versus Big Boss Magma, who was the invading heel from Osaka Pro at the time. But they do the swerve where Big Boss Magma becomes Magnitude Kishiwada. He joins Blood Generation. And then you get this 12-man tag. It's Shima, Fuji, Kishiwada, Yoshino, Doi, and Shingo against Mori, Hulk, Dragon Kid, Genki Horiguchi, Naoki Tanizaki, and Ryo Saito. That is the most unappreciated match of 2005. That match is fucking insane. And then the July, God, what a 2005 Dragon Gate, Mike. I could
what
go
a
on.
Year.
What a great year.
Man, I know we have our plans, but maybe a future plan revisiting.
It's just staring me in the face because it's 20 years ago, and I'm like, man, we should have done that. But that's okay. I'm very, very happy about what we're doing instead. But it's just 2005 Dragon Gate. If you haven't seen it, again, as I said up top, it's a super easy to consume promotion. A lot of this stuff wasn't online a few years ago, but now is. I feel like it's pretty easy to find this stuff, and it's all really good. And it's stuff, again, like, I watched 2005 Dragon Gate at the start of the pandemic because I had time. I was like, well, Mike had just gotten his hands on this footage. Let me watch this all the way through. And I loved it then. But again, I think Shima in particular right now, his 2005 is going to age really well because there's just not a lot of people that can do what he could do at that point in time. And that really jumped out to me on this watch. I love the heel turn. I love Milano and Saito, but I came away from this more impressed with Shima, which has never been the case when I've watched this show before.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about what the otherworldly presence that he kind of is able to kind of immediately tap into. And I mean, also, just one last note. You think about how Crazy Max was progressing, and then by 2001, they were a switch kind of a tweener group. So having him as true blue heel at this time. I mean, you're looking for through lines, and it's like, hey, maybe we lost Crazy Max, like heel Crazy Max with Shima, but now we have him on top, and he's back now as Blood Generation. It's just what a time for the promotion, and it really kind of it's heartening in its one way that like they had this year right before their real exposure to the international audience with 33106. Like this one kind of provide, like everyone was getting their reps there, and we're really solidifying the home ground of the promotion in its first year as Dragongate, and then it really kind of everything's off to the races, and I think it just starts right here. So Case, do you have anything else you wanted to touch on before we get out of here this week?
No, I don't. I got to run, but we'll be back next week with 2025 Dragon Gate stuff. We'll actually have some shows to review.
Yeah, that's right. We have a lot of stuff. I think right now, just running through the lineup that we'll probably be able to get into. There is the show on Thursday. This is the East-West show. They have the Kyoto KBS Hall coming up, and then also the big kickoff in Osaka. So, I mean, we'll get almost through the whole loop before we will be back with you. But 2025 is now quickly upon us in Dragon Gate, and we're ready to kick that off next Tuesday. So you could follow us on social media at Open Voice Gate if you'd like to join the conversation. If you have your own big transformative matches in the company's history, feel free to contribute at the Voices of Wrestling Discord. We're at the Open Voice Gate channel for the show itself, but we also have a really good Dragon Gate channel there in community as well. Case is at _in your case. I'm at Fujii. Thanks for listening to Open Voice Gate. We'll be back with you next week. Take care.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor.
And I'm Kelly.
And we are the co-hosts of Jumping Bomb Audio, the #1 show all about the world of Joshi Pro Wrestling. Episodes drop every other Monday, where we discuss the biggest Joshi news, review shows, and preview the hottest upcoming Joshi action.
So whether you're a new fan or an old fan, we've got something here for you at Jumping Bomb Audio.
Check us out on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.